Rowdy just found a gopher. She's all excited about finding a gopher. During pruning, this is a busy time of the year for us here. There's almost 50,000 plants out on the vineyard. And the one thing that we're still a little shy of mechanization on is what we call final pruning. So we showed you what pre-pruning is in the machine, and that's to get those canes out of the way so that the crews can focus on this, which we're going to show you today too, where they're pulling those canes out of their way. Those canes have been cut and aren't attached with the tendrils. So if all that whole natural canopy was there, you could see why pre-pruning saves us, about 40% more productivity. What we tell the crews is how many shoots we want them to keep. These are called shoots. And how many buds we want them to keep. And so why that's important, each of these buds will grow next year's cane. So there'll be, and so what they're instructed to do here is to leave 3 buds. 1, 2, 3. This is Grenache. If Grenache is very vigorous, big canopy. So if you leave 3 buds instead of 2, these canes will create not so much length, so they're not all the way down to the ground, if that makes sense. So vigor and canopy is one of the most important things as winemakers we try to control. So canopy's my arms, the length of these canes, and we don't want them down to the ground, and we don't want them a little scrawny where they won't hold fruit. And so we want just that right balance. This happens to be Grenache, the most vigorous of the 14 varietals that we grow here on the ranch. Vigorous meaning lots of shoots, lots of canes. So right next door to the Grenache is Vineyard, a less vigorous plant. And this is more of a standard pruning for our ranch, which is what we call 16-2. So if we go to the crews and say we want 16-2, now I'll show you what I'm talking about. Start here on the end of this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is 2 buds. A bud there, a bud there. You see where they cut off this big one here? And they made a new position because we don't want it to just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Same thing here. This was a big cane that was going to just get taller and taller. And so they eliminated this one, brought in, and we call this a renewal spur. So this is to get this lower, and then this is this year's productivity with 2 buds. And look at the Grenache. You can see how, even from a distance, I can tell they pruned this bigger, taller. 3 buds versus 2 buds. You notice at the end of all the posts, because sometimes we've got 14 people here, 16-1. This tells them about 16 spurs and 1 bud. The reason this is 1 and not 2 is we're in a young grafted block right now where we have young vines and they don't have the ability yet to hold those extra canes. So what 16-1 tells me is I'm going to have about 16 to 20 canes. If it was 16-2, about 32 to 36 canes. Each cane, 2 clusters, plus or minus. Some canes have 1, some canes have 3. But so how we predict how much fruit these vines are going to produce is a multiple of the canes. We have very old Cabernet vines. And so one of the things that happens with an old vine is they get kind of gnarly. Big old 26-year-old vines with, you see the size of this trunk? Look at my hand. And then you look right over here, and this is actually a replacement vine that's probably about 10 to 12 years old. And so as vines get older, they're harder to work with. And so one of the things that I've studied throughout the world, they get disease from being cut a lot of times, and then the disease will get in a certain portion. So you notice there's no spurs here. In fact, this spur right here is dead. I can tell by the color that it's dead versus this one that's alive. So rather than remove this whole vine and lose 6 years of productivity, one of the things that's done a lot in Europe, and I'm doing it here, is as the vine gets older, it will push what we call suckers, new young vines. And I'll show you a couple examples of this. But what we will do with this now is create a replacement bridge, is one of the names we call it. So if they get to an old vine and they see this, they're trained not to remove this so that we can go back later and make decisions. Do we want to use this very youthful, fruitful? So that would be another way to replace this younger wood with the older wood, but without starting over, because the roots are 26 years old. So the crews are out here finishing up in these blocks. This row has 324 vines, and so a 320 vine day is a pretty productive day. This is pruned now, and this whole block's been pruned, but this is where we start out. Pretty amazing. Awful lot of work on these old vines, but they make great wines.